Today's daf is Ayin Bet. He said he got to the top word, which is the middle of a discussion. So I'm going to go back a few lines just to give us context, even though I know for many this will be a review. So we're in the middle of a complex and somewhat challenging sugya about very interesting and fascinating sugya
Maybe for my
about,
book.
sorry, not for me, how tuma functions, right? Does if what we call this topic we had yesterday was tuma belu'ah. A person swallows something and then they walk into a house where there's a dead body. So everything in the house becomes tameh, but the thing in their stomach is not tameh, or the thing in a cow's stomach, if it's an uber, does not become tameh. So we said yesterday that in fact the all these statements were obvious because there was a Mishnah, and I'm gonna start from 5 lines from the bottom, okay? Which is tahara blua tanina, that the concept that if you have something tahar that is swallowed inside of an animal or a person, and then that person or animal becomes tameh, that thing does not become tameh. That's also a Mishnah, Ditznan, as the Mishnah said, bala taba'at tahora. If a person swallows a ring, a metal ring, that's tahar. And then he's nichnas la'olam meit, he goes into a tent with a dead body, which means anything in that space becomes tamei mate. And then, of course, he has to become tahar, like we had in this week's parasha, v'hiza, v'shana, v'taval, right? Like the people in the fight of Midian. You go and you get haza'ah, shlishi and shvi, and you go to the mikvah, v'hikiyah, and then after the person becomes tahar, he vomits up the ring, comes up. It's been sitting in his stomach, it never was absorbed, and he comes up. Says the Mishnah, Harihi Kimashaita. The person doesn't become tamei again because of this ring. The ring never became tamei because it was inside of him when he went and became tamei. So basically, that's a Mishnah. Answers the Gemara. So why did Rabbah have to tell us that? Answers the Gemara. Kika Amar Rabbah kigon shebala shtei tabaot. Rabbah's case was where you swallowed from our Mishnah 2 rings, achat tameya achat Torah, right? And they should probably keep rings away from this person. But either way, he swallowed 2 rings, one that is tamei mate, let's say, and one which is tahar, not at the same time. So the question is, do they touch each other in his stomach and make the other one tamei, right? And the answer is what Rabbah was saying is lo mitamyele tme'a le that the tamei one does not make the tahar one. And let's say one ring, had your name on it and one didn't, so you knew which one was which, and they came up. The one that was tahar remains tahar. The one that was tamei remains tamei. Says the Gemara now at the top of the daf Ayin Bet Amud Aleph, which is the beginning of today's daf.
Wait, if
But
two metal objects touch each other otherwise, they transfer chuma?
if one is yeah, so they could, especially the tamei ochlim, right? If one is an avatuma. So remember, if a person goes, if a metal thing, and this was a top part of the discussion of Midyan today, if a metal thing goes into an olam mate, it becomes an avhatuma. It can
Hmm.
transmit tuma to another called rishon. You can't go from rishon down except to food,
Hmm.
but an av can make a rishon.
So,
Correct.
inanimate object can transfer chuma to a rishon.
Correct. Ask them Gemara at the top now, Vayin Ben Amid Aleph, Va'ubar v'chaya tikashtei taba'ot damli. Right, the case that this all came from yesterday was a case in our Mishnah where you had an ubar in and a chaya, which is a midwife, right? In this case, who reached her hand into the womb, and we talked about the chaya not becoming tamei by touching the ubar, right? But why is that the case? It's like shtei tabaot, and you're saying that if one thing, as long as it's inside the woman, in the case of the womb or the 2 rings inside the stomach, one doesn't make the other tamei. So why does the hand of the chaya become tamei from touching the ubar, even though the ubar is tamei? And we said in the Mishnah, "Kamitami le ubar lechaya," that the ubar, which is tamei because it's not alive, is mitame the midwife. Amar Rabba said, Rabba, it's different. You're right, it's true, but shani ubar ho v'sofalatzeit. The uber is going to leave. The uber obviously cannot stay, even a dead fetus cannot stay in the mother's womb. It's going to be expelled. And so even though it's inside right now, because it's so full, let's say it's as if it already left and it can be mitame, a tahar woman. Ask the Rava, what kind of thing is that to say? The ring also has got to leave. You can't keep the ring in the person forever. Rava, uber sofa, let's say tabat in sofa, let's say. So that's not an explanation. Elo Amar Rava says Rava, you should have just paid attention to the Pumpaditai, Yadi time of the Hamilta. The people in Pumpadita, they know how to explain this concept. which is a very interesting, a little bit of a common kind of saying. Remember, Rava and Abaya were both students, but were colleagues, sorry. Abaya was himself a student of Rav Yosef, who was the Rosh Hashiva in Pumbedita. So Rava said, you've got to go to Pumbedita to get an answer to this. And Manu Rav Yosef, that's of course Rav Yosef, who was famously the head in Pumbedita. What did Rav Yosef say? Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Tuma zu eino midivrei Torah ela midivrei sofrim. That in fact, when our Mishnah said yesterday that a midwife who sticks her hand into the womb and there's a dead fetus in the womb and she touches it, she becomes tamei. She's really not tamei. It's not a real tuma. It's not midoraita. Because midoraita, just like the two rings, one doesn't make the other one tamei. Inside the womb, you wouldn't become tamei ever. But midorabanan, they become tamei. What is now? Says the Gemara. What do you mean when you say eino midivrei Torah? Right? Why don't you just say this is tuma midivrei sofrim? Why do you have to speak? How Rashi understands it. Why do you speak out eno midivrei Torah, ela midivrei sofrim, delotema? Because you shouldn't say that the Mishnah, which said that the midwife is tamei, is alibad Rabbi Akiva. That is going according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is an opinion to Amar. Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion, 10 lines from the top. The Amar uber bimei isha tamei. According to Rabbi Akiva, unlike the prevailing opinion that we've talked about so far, a uber itself inside the womb of a woman makes the mother tamei. Right. So far, we've said, according to which is the opinion, not like Rabbi Akiva, that an uber inside a woman, because it's still inside of her, it's called tumat hastarim, right? It's hidden tuma. It doesn't make the woman tamei, the mother, until the uber leaves the mother, right? And that's why our Mishnah said the mother is not tamei, but the chaya, the midwife who puts her hand in, becomes tamei, right? But you might have thought if we didn't say Eno Midivrei Torah, then in fact we're saying that it's like Rabbi Akiva, who says that uber itself makes the woman tamei. Ella, what we're saying is no, Philo Rabbi Yishmael. Even according to Rabbi Yishmael, the other opinion, the Amar Uber b'mei isha tahor, that while the uber remains inside the woman, the woman becomes tahor, right? The uber itself is tamei, but the uber itself is inside of her. That the woman is tahor. Still, gazru batuma midrabanan. They made a tuma, a gzera of tuma midrabanan for the midwife. That when the midwife puts her hand in and touches this uber, she becomes tamei. My time. What's the source? What's the reason for this tuma midrabanan for the midwife? When of course we didn't make the gzera for the mother, right? So again, our Mishnah said the mother is tahar as long as the baby is or the fetus, the dead fetus is still inside of her, but the midwife becomes tamei. My taima, Amrav Hoshaya, because we're worried, Gzera Shema Yotzi Vlad Rosho Chutz the Prusdar. We're worried about a circumstance where the fetus will stick, again, it might not be alive, but the head of the fetus will come out of the prusdar, which is literally means the opening, but is the vagina, right? That the head of the fetus will come out. And of course, once it comes out of the woman, it's mitame. So we're worried that its head will come out, the midwife will touch it, and then she becomes tamei midoraita, right? Now, because of that, because that's the case, we're afraid that if you don't say she's tamei when she sticks her hand in and touches it, that she won't realize and she might come to think, oh, there's no such thing as tuma by a fetus, which is incorrect. It's just because it's inside. And therefore, we make a gzera when it's inside because it's possible, it's not only possible, it's common that it could happen that the head will come out a little bit and she'll touch it in that circumstance. So because, of course, it's a little chaotic in the birthing room, in the birthing process, we're worried that she'll make a mistake, and that's why we make a gzera. Says in Marihachi, if that's the case, Ishanan, right? So why don't you say the same thing about the mother, right? Because again, if the head came out, the mother would become tamei because this fetus is outside of her body and is now touching her. So why don't you say it's also tamei midrabanan when the head is inside of her, when the body's inside of her? Answers the Gemara, well, the mother, she will know. Isha margeshet ba'atzma. A mother feels and she knows if the fetus's head left or didn't leave. She can feel and she can know if it left. She knows that that's why it's tamei. So there's not as much confusion by the mother as by the midwife who may or not realize it's out or it's not out. And so therefore we made a gzera by the midwife and not by the mother. Ask the Gemara, well, why can't we just ask her? Why don't we rely on the mother to tell the midwife, the fetus is out, the head is out, the head is not out? Meaning, why can't, if the mother is believed to know the status, why can't we just ask her for that information? Answers the Gemara, a very important answer, trida. the mother has got a lot of other things on her mind, right? So she is tarud in the birthing process, in labor, in contractions, and bleeding. And this, unfortunately, the fetus is not even alive in this case. So we can't really rely that the mother's going to announce to the midwife, "Oh, the head is out, the head is not out. I feel something. I don't." So we can rely on her to know for herself, especially if you ask her after the fact, right? Did I feel anything in my tameh? But we can't rely on the midwife cannot rely on that. And therefore, because the midwife can't rely on that, they had to make a gzera midrabanan that if a midwife touches a fetus that's not alive, even inside the womb of the mother, she'll tameh midrabanan. The midoraita, according to Rabbi Yishmael, the fetus inside the woman, inside the womb, even if it's not alive, or especially if it's not alive, is not mitameh until it leaves. Ask the Gemara, what is this other machloket you keep referring to of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael about the status of a fetus inside, a dead fetus inside of a woman? My Rabbi Ishmael, my Rabbi Akiva, around halfway down or so, says the Gemara Titania. This is based on the following Breita. The Breita quotes the pasuk, which we had a few weeks ago in the parsha, right? Chol asher yiga al pnei hasadeh. Right? If you recall, the pasuk which talks about tumat meat, right, in Chukat, says, I have it in mind somewhere. Here we go. This is Chukat Yud Tet Zayin in Bamidbar. Chol asher yiga al pnei hasadeh. Anyone who touches in the open field. Bichlal cherev, you touch a sword, or b'meit, or a dead body, or be'etzem adam, or bekever, or you touch a bone or a grave, yitmash shivat yamim. So now, what does that mean? Achol asher yiga al pnei hasadeh. Whoever touches on the face of the field. What's the face of the, what does pnei hasadeh mean? Right? Which sounds like out in the open in the field. Says Rabbi Yishmael, this is to exclude lahotzi ubar shebimei isha. This specifically says that you only are tamei mate if you touch a mate that is out in the open, as if in the field. But if it's an ubar, which is not alive, so it's a dead body, but it's inside a woman's womb, it's not tamei. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says, no, the pasuk is not for that at all. Pasuk is there to tell you the rabot golel v'dofek. Tell you a completely unrelated halacha that if you have a gola and a dofek, which usually translate as the stone, that the gola is the cover of the grave, and the dofek is like a headstone. There's a huge debate about exactly what it means. And even here, Tosfot says, I can't even talk about this today, but go look in Ketubot if you want to know about. But these things are tamei mate, like touching a dead body itself. And that's because that's what's laying out in the field. Says Rabbi Akiva, it's for something else completely. So Rabbi Yishmael uses this pasuk to exclude a dead body inside a woman, and Rabbi Akiva uses it for something else. Says and how's Rabbi Yishmael know what Rabbi Akiva did? Rabbi Yishmael, he would tell you, Golel v'dofek hilchadai gemirala. That's halach Moshe misinai, that Golel and dofek, the covering of the grave is tamei, midoraita, but that's only, you don't need a pasuk for that. Okay, says Gemara. Okay, so I get that Rabbi Akiva uses this pasuk that Rabbi Yishmael uses to exclude. Remember, Rabbi Yishmael is using the pasuk that says al pnei sadeh, that it has to be out in the open, and therefore, if it's in uber b'mei imo, it's not tamei. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva uses the pasuk for something
Why
else.
don't we consider the Uber part of the mother?
We it's a we. I mean, it's a separate entity in terms of tuma. So, meaning if the Uber left, you mean while it's inside the mother? You mean
While
forever?
it's inside, yeah, while it's inside, until it's passed or born.
So I'm not sure I have a great answer to that. Meaning it's possible that's what Rabbi Yishmael's halacha is saying that
For a
basically
live animal, we consider it part of the mother. If we shuck the animal, we can eat like the live fetus, right?
that is correct. Well, we'll get there. That's the next mission, but yes, that is correct. That is
The
true.
opposite case where it's dead, it should also follow the.
Right. So by an animal, that is the case. By a person, I mean we don't exactly eat people, right? So we don't have the same things, but I mean it's conceivable. Like the reason I want to say it's not correct what you're saying is that that could be what Rabbi Shmuel says is from the pasuk, right? Is that
Mhm.
in fact what the pasuk is telling us is that even though it's not alive, it's a dead fetus, which is mitameh. So I want to be clear, a dead fetus is mitameh, right? But
Once
it's
it's out.
once it's out, correct. So maybe that is what he's learning from the pasuk, but he doesn't do it automatically. But I'm not sure that we necessarily. I don't know if there are other implications, so I don't want to speak and say something that's incorrect
I mean,
about
there's huge implications for abortion, right?
there. Well, there are definitely implications in that case, whether it's part of the month. That is correct. So I don't know. Says the Gemara though, Rabbi Akiva, Uber b'mei isha tamei midoraita minale. Rabbi Akiva is saying that an uber inside of a woman is tamei midoraita, right? How do you know that? Now, I don't, this might even be asking sort of what you're saying, James, which is, again, the pasuk said al pnei sadeh, it has to be out in the open. Rabbi Shmuel said that excludes an uber inside of a mother. Rabbi Akiva said, no, that pasuk is tell you something else. So the pasuk doesn't exclude an uber. But ask the Gemara now, how does Rabbi Akiva know to include an uber, right? What's the source? Maybe because what you're saying. I don't think Rashi says that, but Rashi does not say what you're saying, but you might be correct that maybe you would have assumed that an Uber is part of the mother. So why, even if there's no pasuk, does Rabbi Akiva say it's tamei? Amr Reb Oshaya says Reb Oshaya Amr Kra. There's a whole nother pasuk, and we've talked about this before, which says Hanogeya b'meit b'nefesh. A person who touches a dead body, that's no, that's how we're reading the pasuk. Bin nefesh, that's inside a soul. Now, of course, if you read the pasuk, it's actually the pasuk continues and says Hanogeya b'meit b'nefesh ha'adam. Right, so we're sort of cutting out part of the pasuk. But the way we're reading the pasuk is you touch a dead body that's inside another person. That's how Rabbi Akiva reads it. Ezuhum nature b'nefesh shel adam. Havyomer ze ubar shebimei imo. That's referring to an uber that's inside of a mother. That's the way you can fulfill the pasuk of a mate that's inside another person. Rabbi Yishmael says, one second, that's the whole, we're learning something, we learned something completely different. Of course, this is a sugya elsewhere. We learned something completely different from this pasuk, which is, Hami Baile, to tell you, the Revi'at Dam Haba Min Hamet Shemitama. What that is telling you is that it's not just a body that you need to touch to be tamei mate, even blood that comes from a dead person, if it's a sufficient quantity, a revi'at, right, a cupful or whatever a revi'at is, of blood, that would be mitameh mate, just like a body. Shenemar, and the way Rabbi Yishmael learns that is from the pasuk. It says Hanogea b'meit b'nefesh ha'adam, which tells you what is nefesh ha'adam shemitameh. What do you mean? You touch a dead body, that's the soul of a person. What is the soul of a person? Remember, nefesh dam hu nefesh. We always say, right? Ezu nefesh shel adam shemitama. What is the nefesh that's mitameh? Havyom revi'at dam. So that is Rabbi Yishmael's limud, and this is very important, of course, in Taharot, Rabbi Shmuel's, in Ohalot actually, Rabbi Shmuel's limud, that not only does a body be mitameh, or a bone, as we learned from the pasuk, but even a revi'at of dam without any body attached, just a cup full of blood, is mitameh mate as well. And so how does Rabbi Akiva know that? If he uses the pasuk to tell you an uber, Rabbi Akiva is l'tameh. Rabbi Akiva himself has another opinion that Amar Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that af, and this is a machloket elsewhere, right? That af revi'at dam haba'a mishtei meitim mitamei ba'al. Rabbi Akiva says, you know what? You don't need a revi'at dam from one person. Even a revi'at dam that is combined from multiple people. So you have a couple spoonfuls of blood from mate from body number one, a couple from body number two. You put them together in a cup, and now it's a revi'at. Says Rabbi Akiva, that also is mitamei ba'al, like any mate. The Tanya, we'll see it's from another pasuk. Tanya Rabbi Akiva Omer, Minayin Revi'at Dam Haba Mishtei Meitim Shemitama Ba'oel. I know if you take a blood from two people that's mitame ba'oel, Shnemer, it's based on another pasuk, which is much earlier, not in Bamidbar, but in Vayikra, which says Al kon nafshot meit lo davo. You can't be mitame, you can't come into the place where there are nafshot meit, right? What are nafshot meit? It means the souls of the dead. What's the plural, right? How does one person have two nefashot? Says Rabbi Akiva, what that pasuk is referring to is that the blood of a person, which is the nefesh, you can combine shtei nefashot v'shir echad. You can combine two nefeshes, right? Two souls or two quantities of blood from dead people to make one quote unquote dead body or one dead shear. And so Rabbi Akiva
That's
basically,
lifeblood. That's not any blood, right?
Rabbi Akiva is correct. It's just lifeblood. You learn the Mishnayot, I think. Rabbi Akiva learns it from another pasuk, as you said, which again is not our sugya even a little bit. This discussion about what blood is metamei ba'oel is many Mishnayot and Masechet Ohalot. I don't know them very well, but I've learned them a few times because they're always left over when we're doing shloshim, right, for someone. So I know that they're there, but I can't say I remember them very well. Anyway, so that is the end of that sugya, and that's the machloket Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva. Continues the Mishnah now, also continue a very fascinating case, which is a little bit out of the scope of Chullin, but we're getting us back to Kudshim, not to Kudshim, to Taharot. The next case is the following. Let's say, and let me give a little introduction to the Mishnah, but this introduction will be clear. I've mentioned this before because I always forget it. Remember that a animal that dies is called a nevela, right? A nevela, of course, you can't eat a nevela, whether it's a kosher animal or a not kosher animal. If it's not kosher, you of course can't eat it anyways. But even a kosher animal, you can't eat an animal that dies, and an animal that's not shechted, that you shot or you killed, is of course called a nevela, right? The important halacha of a nevela is that not only can you eat it, but it's mitame, right? A nevela has tuma. An animal that's a nevela has tuma. We discussed many times before, which our Mishnah is actually the source of, that there's also a category of animals called treifa that you can eat, right? And obviously, we spent a month learning the treifot. However, the thing about a treifa is if let's say you have a cow that's a treifa and you shech that cow, you can't eat it because it's a treifa, but it's not mitame, right? And you're allowed to handle it. You can feed it to your dogs. You can do whatever you want with it, right? You could sell it. So the shechita of a treifa, although it does not make the animal kosher to eat, does take away the status of nevela from that animal. Okay, now we're going to discuss that all in our Mishnah. We've talked about this before. But in that context, says our Mishnah, if you have a behema mikashele lid, the same case we've had several times in this parak, you have an animal that's having trouble in childbirth, hotzi ubar yado, and the ubar sticks out his hand, or it is stuck out, meaning that the hand flails out of the mother. And now, let me start with this part. I know it's a little complicated. You cut off this hand. I guess you thought maybe the animal will come out easier. I don't exactly know why you cut off the hand, but it doesn't matter, right? You cut off the hand of the animal, and then the animal has not still not delivered its fetus. Then you shech the mother. Says the Mishnah, habasar tahor. The fetus, the meat of the fetus inside the mother is tahor. Now, why wouldn't it be tahor? So the reason it wouldn't be tahor is that the hand that you cut off is tameh. The simplest reason is because it's Avram and Achai, right? So the mother was tahar. You basically cut off, it was alive, sorry. You cut off a limb of this animal while it was alive, quote unquote, the mother and the fetus might be alive. And therefore, you can't eat that limb. We're going to see, this is actually later in the Masechta, that an Aver min Achai, if you cut a limb off of a living animal, that Aver is itself a nevela, basically. So although the animal's kosher, you can then shech the mother and eat it. It's not a problem, right? Even though it's missing a leg, as long as it's not a treifa. The limb is considered to be Aver min Achai. So yeah, nevela, sorry. So even though that limb is nevela, the fact is that although it touched the fetus in utero, right, when you cut it off, and the process of cutting it off, it doesn't make the fetus tameh. Okay, that's how we are easiest way to understand the Mishnah. Now, if you do the opposite, again, the fetus stuck out this limb, and then you shech the mother in labor, right? Then although the fetus is mutar, because as James pointed out, even if the fetus is dead, the fact that you shechted the mother, you're allowed to eat a dead fetus. It's just considered to be like a spleen of the mother. But the fetus is basar magan nevela. It is tameh, like something that touched a nevela. Because since the limb that you cut off was a nevela, the rest of the fetus is second degree. It's as if it touched a nevela. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Those are the words of Rabbi
I
Meir.
thought you didn't cut off the limb in the second case.
No, you did. You just did it after the mother died.
Oh, okay.
Shacharet imo, and then you cut off the limb. The basar is
Oh,
magan.
so that's why you would cut off the limb before shechting the mother.
Okay, potentially. It's a good point. Divrei Rabbi Meir. We'll see in the Gemara. It's not so simple. In case you thought it was simple. The Chachamim omrim, and the
So
Chachamim
simple.
say, Maga treifa shchuta. No way. This is it's the fetus touched a treifa that you shechted. Meaning the reason the limb is puzzle in this case, where you didn't cut it off, right? You didn't cut off the limb. Why is the limb puzzle? Because it's a treifa, right? By definition, remember this is the beginning of our parak. Anything that was left that was stuck out is considered to be a treifa. So the limb itself is a treifa. You cannot eat this limb that was stuck out of the mother before shechita. But the meat that's inside, it's not touching a nevela. The limb's not a nevela. The limb is a treifa because once you shech the mother, you basically take away the status of nevela from the animal, including the fetus, including the limb that was stuck outside. So it's tameh like you touched a treifa. Now the Gemara is going to ask, when touching a treifa is not tameh. So what do you mean it's like touching a treifa? And the Gemara is going to answer that it's true. Touching a treifa is not tameh, but there's exera midrabanan of kudshim. That kudshim touching a treifa is tameh, so that's what the status of it is. Says the Gemara, now I turn the page to Ayin Bet Amid Bet. Ma matzino, said this is the Chachamim speaking. Why do we think that this limb is not mitameh, the fetus? Because ma matzino b'treifa sheshchitata mitarata. Just like any treifa, right? That is an animal that's wounded. You go and shech that animal, it doesn't become tameh, even though it's not mutter to eat because it's a treifa. Av shchitat behema, so too the shchita of the mother, titaher ta'ever. It purifies this limb that went outside, which is usher to be eaten because it's a treifa, but it's not tameh. Amar lahem, Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi Meir, that's true, that shchita is matara treifa, but that's the animal itself. This limb is not the animal itself, it's a limb of a fetus. Lo im tihara shchita treifa ota. The shchita of a treifa makes it tahar davar shebegufa, its own body. But titaher te'ever davar sheinu gufa. Are you going to say that it's mitaher, the limb, which is not part of the body? So this is how we understand the Gemara the Mishnah so far, that the machloket is whether shchita of the mother will be mitaher, the limb of the fetus that is a treifa. Is it considered to be like any other treifa and it's tahar, or is it considered to be a different body and therefore it's still tameh like every other nevela? Okay, so that is the Mishnah. Again, we're going to discuss this in the Gemara. But before we get into this further, and Rashi here adds a vav, which the Bach adds as well, or Minayin, we're 5 lines from the top of Daf Ayin Bet Amud Bet. Minayin l'treifa sheshchita mitarata. What is the source of this halacha that we've mentioned many times so far, that a treifa that has shchita becomes tahar, meaning it's no longer a nevela, right? Of course, when it's alive, it's tahar. But once it's dead, it's how do you know that it's not in the category of nevela and it is a tahar meat? Says,
Non-kosher animals are tahor until they die.
yes, all living things are tahar. I should maybe all is an exaggeration. All animals that are living are tahar. I mean, unless they become tamei, of course, right? But as they are, minayin the well, right? Minayin the treifa sheshchitata mitarata. How do you know that a shchita of a treifa makes it tahar? Because you would have thought the following: behema tameya surabachila. Look, think about it. A behema tameya, like a dog, right, is usher to be eaten. Av treifa surabachila. Now, of course, a cow that has missing its, we learned all the treifot, that's missing its sumen hagidim, is also usher to eat. Why don't you say that just like a behemat me'ah, you write, Ein shchitato mitarato, if you shecht your dog, it doesn't become tahar, meaning it's a nevela, it's going to be mitameh, like every other nevela. So why don't you say, and Rashi goes through, if you were interested, he brings the Torat Kohanim, which proves that. But why don't you say, Af treifa lo titarenu shchita? That's so too by a treifa, you can't eat it, shchita doesn't make it tahar. Answers the Gemara, that's like the Shakotai, right? The discussion. Why, that's what you would have thought. Lo, that is incorrect because imamarta behemat me'ah. The reason that a behemat me'ah is, or you could say by behemat me'ah, the reason why shchita does not make it tahar from nevela, shlo haytil shata kosher, because it was never kosher. You never could have been kosher, and a dog was never kosher. Tomar b'treifa shaytila shata kosher. A treifa, when it was born, it was a cow. It is a cow still, and it was, you could have checked it and eaten it. Then it got a mum, and it became a treifa. So now you can't eat it, but it at least falls into a different category where shchita would be mitaher. Says the Mishnah, that's not a good proof at all. Take back what you just said, meaning it's the way we often reject the claim, right? It doesn't make any sense. What about animals that are born? A cow can be born a treifa. Harishan older treifa min habetin. Are you saying that if a cow is born a treifa, right, that then shchita does not make it tahar? How would you know minayin? In that case, that it's tahar. Answers the Mishnah, you're right. The case is loim amrit emarta, sorry, bebehimat me'ah, shkein be'ein b'mino shchita. There's no, in its species, there's no shchita. There's never a case where you can shecht a dog or whatever, or a lion and make it tahar. So therefore, even if you do shchita, it never permits it. But tomar b'treifa sheyesh b'mino shchita. But don't compare that to a treifa, where a treifa cow, sure, another cow, if you shechted it, would be tahar. It would be kosher. I mean, not tahar. You can eat it. So therefore, the shchita will be mitaher the treifa. That is the proof, says our Mishnah. And adds the Mishnah one last detail, halfway down, last words in the Mishnah. We're going to have, this is, I think, not tomorrow, the next Mishnah, or maybe two Mishnayot from now, a very interesting case of what's called a Ben Shmona Chai. They had very interesting case perspective, we've seen this before, on whether a fetus is viable or not viable. And there's a Ben Shmona is, even though it doesn't literally mean 8 months, because some animals have 8 months or 9 months, but what it means is a premature fetus, right? So in human terms, a Ben Tesha is a full-term fetus, and a Ben Shmona is a 8 month or early fetus. So we're going to see later in the Mishnah that a Ben Shmona Chai, that if a fetus, you kill a mother, shech the mother, or even kill a mother, and you find a fetus inside of that mother that's considered to be a premature fetus, we'll see how they knew that, but that's what they knew, that animal is not considered to be viable. It's not going to live. And so shechita of that animal does not make it kosher to eat. You're not allowed to eat that animal. Again, we're going to get into more detail of this later in the parak. So says our Mishnah, if that's the case, since shechita, since it's a type of animal that would never become kosher with shechita, then if you do shecht it, it should not become tahor from nevela because it's never able to be shechted. So ein shechita to mitarato. I would say by your logic that shechita does not mitaher that animal, lefi she'ein b'mino shechita, because you never can shecht an 8-month-old or a premature fetus. Right? So again, we'll get into cases later. Even though sometimes these animals live for some time, shechita will not make it kosher to eat, but shechita will also not make it tameh or tahar from being tameh as in nevela. So that's the Mishnah. Well, ask the Gemara before we get too much into the Mishnah. Remember, the first machloket in the Mishnah was you had an uber stuck out a limb, right? The limb was tameh, because let's say it's nevela because it's ever minachai, let's just say, because you cut it off, and then you shechted the mother. We said in that case, according to Rabbi Meir, according to everybody, sorry, the the rest of the fetus is tameh, right? That was the case. That was Rabbi Meir's opinion in the Mishnah. I'm sorry, I confused the two cases, right? That
Tahor.
if the first case is tahar, correct. If you cut it off before shechita, it's tahar. The second case is where the fetus the limb was stuck out. You shechted the mother, right? At the time you shechted the mother, this limb that's sticking out of the fetus of the mother becomes either nevela according to Rabbi Meir or treifa according to the Chachamim. Say Rabbi Meir because it says Rabbi Meir because it's a nevela. The rest of the fetus is tameh because it touched the nevela, right? Ask the Gemara, so what? I mean, again, the Chachamim argued and said it's not nevela, so there's no tuma. But even according to Rabbi Meir, who says it is nevela and there's tuma, but why is the rest of the fetus tameh? It's hidden inside the mother, and so remember, when you have something outside, it shouldn't be metame. What's inside? The tumat betastarim lo metanya. What's hidden inside should not become tameh. Maybe this is Rabbi Meir the tameh. Maybe this is Rabbi Meir, according to a shita that Rabbi Meir himself said in the end of Masechet Kelim. It's not. We have a somewhat complicated Mishnah in Kelim, which is true about every Mishnah in Kelim, which is talking about tumat of a zav. If you recall, again, little background, short background, that a zav is mitameh in two different ways. She can be, a zav is a man, or zava, or a woman, can be mitameh by touching something, like any other avatuma. If a zav touches a coat, let's say, let's pick a blanket. A zav touches a blanket. That blanket becomes tuma maga zav, which is a rishon, right? The zav is an avatuma. The blanket becomes a rishon l'tuma. Like we mentioned earlier, rishon l'tuma does not pass on except to food and in special circumstances. However, the Torah has a very innovative halacha by a zav, that if a zav or a zava have what's called medras, right? They ride on something, the pasuk says, yishkav alav azav. So let's say they step on top of something, or they ride and they sit on top of something, that thing becomes tamei av hatuma. So it becomes tumat medras. So if a zav, let's say, is walking down the road and they stand on a mat, that mat becomes tameh, even if they don't touch the mat. Let's say they're wearing shoes that are not transferred tumah, the mat itself becomes tumah of what's called avatuma, called tumat medras. Now, I'll point out, I'm going to give away some of the Mishnah because I'm being generous here, that if the zav themselves walk on it and touch it, then in theory, the mat itself will become tameh twice. It'll become tameh avatuma as medras, and rishon l'tuma as maga medras. Now, the question is, their double jeopardy is a very important question. The reason it's an important question is that, like we said in not in this week's parsha, but we said earlier, that if you take something that's tameh and you make it unusable, it becomes tahor, right? So if you take a kli and you break it, its tumah goes away from it. The minimum size for a mat that a zav can walk on is 3 by 3 tfachim. So that's like, I don't know, 3 by 3 tefachim is like a foot, let's say, a foot by a foot, right? So if you take something that's a foot by a foot and it's tumat medras and you cut it in half, it's no longer tameh because you've ruined it from being a medras. It could still be a handkerchief, right? It could still be a napkin, but it's no longer something you can step on or ride on. However, so the tuma of medras would go away. But tuma of maga medris, of a zav touching something, is much smaller shear. It's 3 by 3 etzbaot, which let's just say 3 by 3 inches. Again, I don't know if that's what an etzba is, but a much smaller size because it could be a handkerchief. So you could have a middle ground where you have something that can't become tamei medris because it's too small, but it could become tamei with what's called maga medris or touching a zav. And that's the case of the Mishnah. So now let's read the Mishnah. It's not. It says the Mishnah, 10 lines from the bottom. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Kelim, all the way at the end, the 27th parak of Kelim. Let's say you have a mat, a handkerchief, a cloth that's shlosha al shlosha. It's 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim, and it was touched, it was ridden on by, stepped on by a zav, and then you tear it in half. Shenechalak. You cut it in half. Says the Mishnah, tahar min hamedrus. It's no longer tamei for medrus because it no longer is something to be walked on, and so the tuma leaves it. However, avot tamei maga medrus. It's tamei, the second level, because it's as if it touched something that was tumat medrus. Divrei Rabbi Meir, right? These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Now, Tanya. Now, again, many say that the word Tanya shouldn't be there because the Mishnah continues with these words, but the Mishnah continues. Amar Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, what are you talking about? Well, before I just read Rabbi Yossi, what we think Rabbi Meir means is that even though, now, how exactly does a cloth touch itself? So we think that that is a case of tumat starim. Basically, it is the inside fibers, essentially, of the cloth are touching itself. So although it's hidden inside, because there's nothing that's exposed, right? The fact that the cloth became tamei, it touched itself and made itself tamei the next level. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. So that's why we think Rabbi Meir holds tumat starim is tamei. And continues the mission of Tanya, or Vitznan, it should say, Amar Rabbi Yossi, what do you mean? It never touched itself. What? When did this cloth touch another cloth that was tumat medrus? Ella, the only thing I agree with you, says Rabbi Yossi, Shem naga bo zav shetamei maga zav. That if the zav actually physically touched this cloth, the cloth itself would have two levels of tuma, and it would be both medrus, which if when you ripped it up, that would go away, but would have tuma of touching a zav, which would remain even when you ripped it up. So this shows you
Only if the zav is barefoot.
only if zav is barefoot, correct, or sitting on it with her touch. Yeah, exactly, touching it directly. Says the Gemara, well, you're right, but that in fact is not the machloket there, because lav itmar Allah, didn't we teach in the Gemara or about this Mishnah, Amar Ula, lo shanu ela shlosha shenechlak. That only, the machloket Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir is only if you take a cloth that's 3 by 3, exactly, or somewhat a foot by a foot, and you cut it in half. Because then neither half is large enough to be mitame b'medrus. Okay? Aval, but if you take, no, this is very complicated. Let's say you take a 10-foot long, I don't know, mat that the Zav stepped on, and you tear off a 3 by 3, a smaller than 3 by 3 corner of that, right? So the whole thing is tummy medrus. And now you tear off 6 inches by 6 inches on the corner. Says the Ula that Rabbi Yossi would agree that in that case, because since the primary mat remains tummy medrus, as you pull off the 2 by 2, let's say the smaller than 3 by 3, it in that tearing, you have to touch the initial one. So although it's smaller, it definitely touches it. If it comes from a larger baged, bishat prishatan me avihen, in the time that you're tearing off from its father, meaning from the parent garment, mikablo tuma me avihem. It always is assumed that in somewhere there's friction in that process where even after it was torn off, it retouched it. And therefore, Rabbi Yossi would admit that there's tuma of touching medrus in that case. Now, why is that relevant? Because our Mishnah, where you tore off a limb from a uber, is similar to the case where you tore off a small part from a large mat. Hanami bishat prishatan me'ever, mikabel tuma me'ever. Here too, at the time that you tear off the limb from the fetus, the limb which is tameh, according to Rabbi Meir, because it's nevela, it will make the fetus itself nevela, touching a nevela. So that is the answer of, I don't know, there's not a name with this answer. That's the first answer. The second answer of the Gemara is that, you know what, there's a whole big difference. I don't agree at all. Because it says Ravina, there you're talking about a baguette. A baguette is not meant to be torn. No one plans to tear up a baguette. And therefore, when you tear it, you don't transmit tuma from one part to the other. Beged lav l'chaticha koi. But uber l'chaticha koi, an uber is meant to be cut off. Echol ha'omei lachtoch ki chatoch dami. Anything that is ultimately going to be cut off, because you're going to cut off this limb, it's as if it's already cut off at the time that it happened. And therefore, you think about it as if the limb, although it's again attached to the fetus, imagine the limb attached to the fetus, imagine in your head like it's separated. And therefore, a separate limb is touching the fetus. So unlike a beged where you assume it's one entity and it's not touching itself, a limb is considered to be a separate entity even when it's attached, because anything that's about to be cut off is as if it's cut off. And in fact, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Came out at the top of Tafai and Gimel and Aleph. Rabbi Meir, it's not as another Mishnah back in Taharot says in Pesach Mikvaot, Kol yadot hakelim she'en arukot vatim lekitzatsan. Let's say you have a handle of a kli that's 2 feet long, right? You make it a very long one so you can manage it while you're creating the kli, but you're planning on cutting it off so that when you sell it, it's going to be 12 inches long, right? Says Rabbi Meir, matbil ad makom dam mida. You can put that in a mikvah and up to the place where you're planning on cutting it, because it says if you already cut it off, you can imagine that it already happened. Different Rabbi Meir. And the Chachamim disagree, and they say achiyat bilat kulo, right? That you have to in fact be tovel the whole thing. Says the Gemara, but even now we could be going according to the Rabbanan. Afilo tema Rabbanan. The truth is, you can even say according to the Rabbanan, because chiburei achlin kiman mefarti dami. That when you're talking about foodstuffs, right? Unlike kalim, unlike pots, it's as if they are already separated. Unagiya ba'adavi, it's as if they're touching each other. And so therefore, the way you understand our Mishnah, and the reason, according to Rabbi Meir, if the limb sticking out of the mother is a nevela, it's mitame, the rest of the uber, is because you imagine, either because it's literally being cut off, and the time that you cut it off, you in fact, it touches itself, or because you imagine it's as if it's cut off, it's a separate entity. And because it's a separate entity, it can be mitame itself. It's not considered to be tumat starim. Now, says the Gemara, just real quickly before I know we're late at night, everyone's tired, but just two more lines. Bishmal Ula, Ula was the first explanation, right? Who explained that at the time you're cutting it off, it has to touch itself. So that now makes sense why the Mishnah, on the end of the Mishnah, said the mother was shechted, and then you cut off the uber. Because in the process of cutting off the limb, not the uber, the limb of the uber, you actually metame the rest of the uber. According to Ravina, if you imagine that this limb is as if it's cut off already and it's touching itself, you don't actually need to cut it off, right? It automatically makes the rest of the animal tameh. So that's when you're right. You don't actually need to cut it off according to Ravina. But we want to keep some symmetry in the Mishnah. And in the first case of the Mishnah, you had to cut it off, because that's why it wasn't there when you did shechita. So in the end of the Mishnah, we also say the word chatra, but in fact, you don't even need to cut it off for it to become tameh with the fetus, because you imagine that it's cut off. And so that is how you explain the Mishnah. Tomorrow, God willing, we're up to now the 2 dots. We're going to get into the underlying machloket, which is, why do the Rabbanan consider this limb to be a treifa and Rabbi Meir consider this limb to be a nevela, right? Which is the bigger question of the Mishnah, which we will learn tomorrow. And I hope everyone will be able to join us at 7:45 a.m. to do that in a few short hours, 9 hours, 10 hours.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Shavua tov.
Shavua tov. Have a good night, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.
Another time.